Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. We are continuing on with our Corrado work today. So doing some enhancements to the VR6 Corrado. Many people who have heard of the car are probably familiar that Volkswagen built this as the easiest way, well, no, I'm going to take it back. The second easiest way to make a Volkswagen go 140 miles an hour. The first being to dump a Volkswagen Bug out of a helicopter and just watch it plummet. This was one of the first commercials for a Volkswagen Corrado, was them having the Bug drop out of the helicopter while they showed a Corrado zooming by at 140 miles an hour on the desert floor, where the Bug crashed into the desert floor. Anyway, so the Corrado in stock form way back in the day could do 140 miles an hour, and they made the speedometer reflect that fact. But it's actually, interestingly enough, the Corrado would go faster than 140 miles an hour. Maybe the G60 maxed out right at 140 and 141, right in that range there. It was gear limited. It could not go any faster if it wanted to, or if it had more power, it would just get to 140 miles an hour faster. The VR6, however, had different gearing, and it could go significantly faster. In fact, if you were cruising on the Autobahn in yours, it was not uncommon to be zipping along doing 165 miles an hour in your VR6 Corrado. Of course, your speedometer would not reflect this fact. For the first couple of years of the production of the Corrado, because the Speedo still stopped at 140 miles an hour. Well, in some of the later models, they changed that and they put a 160 mile an hour speedometer into the car. And now I have gotten a hold of the 160 mile an hour speedometer, and I am going to be swapping that into my VR6 Corrado so that it has this nice little lovely enhancement. And conveniently enough, it looks like it should just come right off of the gauge cluster that is in there and bolt right in place without any other modifications. So this should, and I qualify this with quotes, should go smoothly. I've removed my gauge cluster many times before to get to things underneath the dash, so I'm going to walk us through. If you do need to remove your gauge cluster for any reason, I'll show you how to do that. Also, if you are one of those folks who has done a motor swap in a Corrado, you maybe moved from a 4-cylinder, either a 16 valve or a G60, to a VR6, you may have noticed that the gauge cluster, specifically the tachometer, does not work properly because it is pulsed for a 6-cylinder rather than a 4-cylinder. So the way to get around that, of course, is to swap in the gauge cluster for a 6-cylinder. But that means your mileage might not be correct. But have no fear, there's a solution for that. You may be familiar with the work of a guy named Matthew Litke. If not, I'll put a link to his Facebook shop page on the description here. He is kind of a little mad scientist who does gauge cluster work, custom work. Famously, he is one of the ones who is doing the work for bringing in a color MFA screen to the Mark IV and some other platforms as well that only came with the red dot pixelated screen in the center, or maybe your Mark IV didn't even come with a screen in the center, but it just had idiot lights in the middle of the dash cluster, and you might like to have that full function computer display. Well, this is the guy to do it for you. He sources these parts, he'll do the installations, and it's one of the best modifications you could probably do to a Mark IV. But since we're talking about a Corrado, if you need to adjust your mileage on your gauge cluster because you've put in a different cluster and you want it to reflect your actual mileage, he can do this. He charges 75 bucks. You send in your cluster and he can do the adjustment of the mileage for you. So well worth it if you want to keep your car accurate and not have the mileage flag anything on Carfax or sites like that. So anyway, I don't have to do that because this gauge cluster is purely mechanical. The electronic component with the Speedo is a different component on the circuitry, so all I have to do is lift this thing off, slap in the new one, and I should be good to go. So we're going to get to that today. I'm trying to think of what else. Well, I'll give you a report on the AC situation. So, I can't remember if I filmed this or not, but I took the condenser that I had sourced as a replacement, one of the last condensers available, brand new, and I'm hoping that some company picks up and starts making some more replacements. Otherwise, a lot of us are going to get really creative in how we cobble together a working AC system if you happen to damage your condenser. But my working condenser turned out to have several leaks in it. So because it was brand new, I'm guessing it was just factory defect, flawed. Maybe it was dropped. I don't know. But it's got a few leaks, and a couple of them are in spots where it's not repairable. So the shop that is doing the work for me on helping me diagnose this recommended that I pull the one out of the car and bring it to them, and they would pressure test that and check it for leaks. I actually had it with the whole system in the car up at a local shop that pressure tested it, and they believed that there was a leak on the hard line coming out of the receiver dryer. And I could see what looked to be like a crack there. Might have just been a differently shaded piece of the pot metal there, or somewhere where something had scored it. I don't know. That's possible. Might be a crack. I haven't had this pressure tested yet because the AC is closed. The AC shop is closed, and it's the weekend, so I got to wait until tomorrow before I can take it and drop it off. But I also noticed that the receiver dryer was cross-threaded. Even though I tried really hard not to cross-thread it, it seems like I either get one side or the other correct, and I haven't gotten both sides of the stupid receiver dryer threaded properly. So that was cross-threaded. I suspect that due to my own incompetence there, that it was probably not cracked. That once I pressurized the system, that since it wasn't sitting perfectly flush at the very end, that the refrigerant was just leaking out past the improperly mated ends of that receiver dryer and its little connector. So I think that's probably what happened. I may actually have a condenser that doesn't have any issues, but I'm going to take it down, have them test it, clean it, make sure that it's in decent shape, and if they need to, they can cobble together parts of both condensers to make one working unit that I can then install back in the car. So I ordered another receiver dryer because I did look at the inside of the one that was in there, and it does look like I screwed up the threads on it. So $20 down the drain there, but So this time my plan is to install the receiver dryer on the condenser outside of the car, so that I can be looking at it from multiple angles and make sure that it is not cross-threaded and everything is seated properly before I put the whole assembly back into the Corrado. Once I reassemble the Corrado, I will be taking it back to this AC place to let them properly charge and test the system. I can do a vacuum test here. I have the vacuum pump and the manifold gauges, and I can check that for the vacuum side and make sure that it's gonna hold a vacuum. If it doesn't hold a vacuum, I know that there's an O-ring somewhere that's not sealing properly and I still have an issue. But what I can't do is I can't properly fill up the system with the exact amount of refrigerant that it needs in order to be happy. You need a scale and special equipment. I actually do know an AC guy that has all that, so maybe I'll have him come out and help me here. But since this is not the sort of stuff that the average shade tree mechanic has, even though, yeah, you can go to Harbor Freight Tools and buy the manifold set, and you can follow the pressure gauge and the temperature chart and just fill it up using those $20, $30 cans of refrigerant that you can get at any auto parts store. It's not going to be exact. It's going to be kind of in a ballpark range, and I want to do it once and do it right and not have to monkey with this again for a long time. So we're gonna do it the right way. I'm gonna have the shop do it, pay a little bit of money, well worth the investment in a local business during this time of Corona crisis. help keep them afloat so they can help out other customers down the line. And of course, that's something that I could finagle, but it wouldn't be exact. And I do want this to be spot on. So today, I'm going to worry about this gauge, swapping it onto the cluster, and I think that'll be enough work for today. I'm trying to think of what else we've got going on. Some other projects. I'm going to make my kids clean a couple of the cars, so that's always an exciting thing. Maybe I'll film a little bit of that, just because slave labor, it's fun. And see what else is coming down the pipeline just while I'm thinking about it. The Fiat has quite a bit that we need to do. We've got to pull the drive shaft, replace the rubber donut joint on the drive shaft, or the giobo, whatever you call it. I like to call it the guibo because it's an Italian car. It sounds like Guido. I know it's stupid. It's a dad joke thing. Maybe it's not even a joke, but that's what gets stuck in my head is guibo. I know it's giobo, but there you go. So that needs to be replaced. While I've got that out, I may as well replace the U-joints because why not? A buddy of mine gave me a replacement drive shaft. He had bought for his Fiat Spider. It turned out to be for the wrong year, so it didn't work with his, but I think it's the right one for mine, and that one's already rebuilt. So I may just compare that and see if we can just swap one for one, and that car will be drivable again. That Fiat Spider, it's a 73. It's got 23,000 original miles. My father bought it new. It's been in the family the whole time. So my dad passed it to me after he was killed in the line of duty in the Navy back in 1995. And I've been caring for it ever since, entering it in parades in memory of him. And so last year, on the way back from our 4th of July parade in Corrado, that was when the rubber donut joint decided to let loose. And we limped the car home. And it's been sitting ever since, but there's some other work that we need to get done to it. I mean, basic maintenance. I do need to repair replace the motor mounts because they're mush at this point, 47 years old. I've got some new suspension components to put on there as well to firm up the ride, and we do need to do some body and paint work on the car. And what else? Oh, the carburetor. I need to rebuild the carburetor. The diaphragm in it is just completely hard as a rock, so I can get it started, but it's a bit like firing up a World War II biplane. You got to pull the throttle and set the choke and spray starter fluid, and then sacrifice a chicken, hop around on one foot, pray to the rain gods, and hopefully it'll start. Now I'm pretty good at that, but nobody else can get the car started. So rebuilding the carburetor should solve all those issues. I'm also thinking about putting an electronic ignition in it rather than the original points-based ignition, which is still working, but I don't want to depend on that. And I have the opportunity to get a used electronic ignition that's just a drop-in, so visually it doesn't change anything. It fits underneath the cap and rotor, or replaces the rotor really of the original system, and much more reliable, much more spark to the actual spark plugs. I have the opportunity to jump on one of those. I'm just waiting to hear back from the person selling it to double check that it will actually bolt onto my particular motor, because there's a few different versions for the 1973. There's like a 14 something, there's a 1592, and then mine is the 1608. So 3 different motors for that year, and I've got the biggest one, which is great, and apparently it's got the nicest carburetor of that trifecta as well, so I want to rebuild that carburetor rather than switch to the newer ones that other folks have. Anyway, trying to keep it original, keep it running, keep it going good. Well, let's get to the gauge cluster, shall we? Alright, if you have not taken off a gauge cluster before, it's fairly simple. I've got a couple of other things going on in here than a normal one. But this is the basics. There are these little screw covers here in the corner of the cluster. You can generally get them off with just your thumbnail. I have them secured with some of this factory goo that I don't know what the stuff is. It came with it from the factory, and it's just this black, you can get it here, this black nasty stuff that that Volkswagen used to secure it in addition to the tabs. So it's this very gummy, sticky, gross stuff, but it works well. If you happen to be missing these, a lot of Corrado owners have lost them over the years. Our good friend over at Phoenix Engineering has reproduced them, so you can buy some brand new screw covers. I forget how much he sells them for, but it's well worth it. I bought a couple of sets just to have spares because, you know, you look up and it's gone, and who knows what happened to the thing. You know, if it got sucked up by the vacuum, if it flew out the window, who knows. Anyway, so there's a screw in each corner. These clusters are very, very brittle after all these years, so one thing to note, don't press in really hard on it with your screwdriver. You could actually damage it just in the process of taking it out. And then, of course, our friend the magnet is going to be, well, your friend during this procedure here to make sure that you're not pushing in or trying to wedge it out and you break the corners of it or something. Again, your factory repair screwdriver is adequate for the task here. And there's a couple of other screws that we're going to get to in just a sec after I loosen these. Take those screws out of the way. The other screws are tucked up underneath here, and you can use a little stubby screwdriver. Is the easiest to release those. You can, if you use a longer screwdriver, you can actually angle it in from underneath all the way down here, and you can get it out, but it's going to be at a slight angle, and you risk stripping these little screws. Again, they don't need to be in there really tight. If you use some blue thread locker when you reinstall them, then you don't have to use a whole lot of torque to get them in place, and they'll stay without the Kung Fu Voodoo Monkey Death Grip. So these guys get out of there. One of the other things that is going to be really helpful to getting this bezel out of the way is lowering your steering wheel. So just pull back, lower that down to the lowest position. That's going to give you some good access to very gently pull back on your bezel. Remember, they're brittle, they're old. I have a Valentine 1 radar detector remote here in my dash. I'm going to go ahead and remove that and leave it dangling in the dash while we're doing our work. And then here is where we start to run into challenges. See, this doesn't really want to fit over there. So if you pull back on this and force it down below where it's going to stay. See, it wants to stay at this click, but you can force it a little lower. So hold it with one hand, and then you can pull it free, and there's enough room for it to come out. So we're just going to set that off to the side very nicely. And my Valentine 1 remote is just going to go tuck down underneath and out of the way for right now. There are two more screws. They are in the upper corner behind the cluster. Let me see if I can get you in here to see where these are. They're very easy to see once you are in here. So let's see. There we go. All right, so I'm going to try to zoom in. Right there in this corner of the dash cluster, that's a screw there in the center. And then over on the other side, you can see it with the white plastic ear holding that in place. So again, kind of a long screwdriver is helpful to get to those, and then have a magnet handy so you don't drop the screw into the dash while you're doing this. That's just a bad day for everyone. Now, it is, they're just fairly regular screws as far as Corrados goes. Nothing crazy special about them. They are a fine thread pitch that matches a lot of the other screws that are found in this car. So if you do drop them down there, it's not the end of the world, but You know, if you're like me, you don't like stuff rattling around down in the depths of your dashboard. That should be here. So I'm going to go ahead and put my magnet down in there and keep it handy for when this screw is ready to come out. It's almost ready. Got it almost completely unthreaded. Alright, got it. So, do the other side as well. And while we're in here, I'm going to note that I have 203,220 miles on the car. So she has been around the block a little bit. Alright, got the other screw out. So the gauge cluster then sits on these little rubber ears on either side. This is another thing that you need to keep an eye out for. When you're pulling this out, it's very easy for those rubber ears, there are rubber sleeves on there, and they can fall off the ear, and you can lose them down in the dash. You don't want to do that, or you can introduce a rattling noise when you put this all back together later. There is an electric connector on the back that we're going to need to detach, and there's a couple of ways to go about doing that. One way is to reach up from inside the dash, squeeze the releases and pull back on it. I believe, if I remember, you can actually manipulate this around sideways and get to the connector to release it just from back here. So I'm going to do it that way. Oh, I hear my kids, the hobbits, they are coming out to wash cars. So this is a 2-finger kind of thing, squeezing this connector, release, and popping it out of place. Again, it does not, it's pretty snug. So I may take the approach of removing this panel here and going back to remove it. That's another way to get to it. All right, so I am having difficulty releasing the connector, reaching through here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this panel here, and this should be fairly easy since I can stick my finger through, pop this out. The light switch will now be fairly easy to pop out as well. Again, be gentle with everything in here because these bezels are no longer made and they're brittle. So just kind of want to be gentle with this stuff, and there we go. It's okay, don't worry about that. All right, this guy here, again, very brittle parts. Just going to take a plastic spudger tool and gently wedge that out. These are one of these body part tools. It won't score the plastic, and as long as you're gentle, it won't crack it either. So we want to avoid all that. Highly recommend not using a screwdriver because it'll score your bezel. Could actually crack your bezel. Ain't nobody got time for that. Alright, so it's coming out now. There we go. All right, got that out of the way, and there's a screw right up here that holds this in place. So just gonna get in here. Alright, screw seems to be a lot longer than it really needs to be for that particular spot, but now my bezel should come free. There we go. And I'll clean that before I put it back. Okay, now I have lots of access to get back here and unclip the connector. Great. That's done. Gauge cluster is free. And here are the little rubber feet that I was telling you about. You want to make sure not to lose them. They do come off real easily. And if they're not there, it'll rattle like crazy as it sits on the little ears inside there. All right, so let's head on inside and we'll switch the gauge cluster or the speedometer. All right, I don't have a whole lot of room on my tool bench here, so we're going to do this mad scientist work with a minimum of room. I'm actually in the process of reorganizing the workspace. So here is the new speedometer. I'll stick that off to the side for just a moment. And to get this gauge cluster apart, if you have not done this before, it's fairly simple. There's a couple of screws holding it together and then a few plastic tabs that just have to be pulled back. So we'll start with the screws. They are in these little cages that are designed to catch them as you release them, but I find that it is best to just be careful, because if you lose them, then you're hosed. You know, good luck finding another screw that perfectly fits that without messing it up. So anyway, both of those are loose. Now, other reasons you might pull apart a gauge cluster, replacing the lights. If you are having problems with illumination, your lights are here for lighting up the gauge cluster. There are a couple backlights as well. A few reasons, you know, your voltage regulator is back here. That can go bad, so that would cause your gauge cluster to not work correctly. There are a few reasons you might have to pull this apart. But we're going to go ahead and unclip here in these corners while lifting up just slightly. So we're going to lift up, oops, unclip, lift up and unclip, lift up and unclip, and I may actually need another spudger just to keep this. Oh, here we go. Okay, so this is lifting off. So that comes off. You can actually remove the plastic polycarbonate here, the clear lens, if you wanted to do something like I've done on mine, where I've put a little carbon fiber inside there just to make it look a little nicer. I am a huge carbon fiber fan. Everybody that knows me knows this, so if you're not a carbon fiber fan, then don't do that. Let's see here. Gonna see what this looks like, and I think I'm gonna have to remove the speedometer from the back. If I recall, there's probably something holding it in place from the back side. So let's see here. It has been a while since I've taken it apart to that level. All right, so there's a bunch of little plastic clips inside here that hold the printed circuit board in place. We're going to very gently peel those back and see if we can release the entire cluster from where it's sitting inside this cage. I'm going to be careful too because this is attached for the lighting and I don't want to break that. But the goal is to remove this cluster, which seems like, actually I don't see anything securing this on the back. So I may just be able to simply lift up. That doesn't make a lot of sense. It seems like they would have it secured somehow. There's these pins, which I'm sure are electrical connectors. If I just lift up on it, and I don't want to break this, but you know, no, there has to be something holding it in place. It doesn't make any sense that it would just be sitting on there. So unless that's just how it works. I don't want to break anything on the circuit board. I'm just pulling up very gently. It looks like it might be releasing just from... Wow, all right, so it just comes up, apparently. Just a little bit of wiggling, and that one's up and out. So goodbye, 140 mile an hour, and hello, 160 mile an hour. Look at that. It's just pressure fit. All right, so there are the electric connections that it has to make going back into place. Obviously, I'm going to want to make sure that I get them in to those holes without breaking anything. So I'm going to look from the back side here off to the side while I'm fitting it. That looks like. All right, fit in place. I'm going to go ahead and wipe off any dust that may have fallen in there while we were working. Just clean off the other gauges here. Clean off this one because it's been in foam packaging. Alright. Just using a microfiber cloth to very gently deal with this. Alright, wow. It's looking fairly good. So, that was pretty painless. There's a little smudge there that has been bothering me. I wonder if I can hit that with some plastic polish on the inside before I put this back together. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to use a little bit of, let me see what I have. Mirror glaze, no. Hold on a second. One of my children is coming to talk to me. Okay, I'm going to use a little bit of this Meguiar's Plast-X to try to polish off just a little smudge on the inside of this, and just a little imperfection that has been bothering me for probably 5 years. And this is great stuff you can use for any sort of clear plastic. If you've got like a Jeep or something like that with a clear plastic window, this is super helpful for polishing that. I happen to have that Fiat Spider with the clear plastic rear window. You can use this to deal with such issues. Alright, so just a little dab on here, and I'm going to just rub it in this spot where there's a, I don't even know what would make this little blemish on the inside of the clear plastic, but it's been there for a long time. I see it at night, it bugs me. So I'm just going to work on that a little bit and see if I can get any better. So take a clear. This is also really good stuff for buffing out if you've got yellowed headlight lenses, like Lexan headlight lenses. This stuff works great for dealing with that. All right, maybe I got it wrong. Maybe it is on the outside of this, which makes a lot more sense.